Chapter 15. The Army of Nothing. It flew above the city, an enormous military plane, black as pitch, slicing through the sky, propelled by 4 large helicopter motors that buzzed like a swarm of bees. At midnight on the dot, the gigantic metal bird opened its black door, and soldiers began to rain on the old factory. The men deployed the black wings of their hang gliders and started to drift in slow, silent circles towards the building, which, from the outside, looked abandoned. They were just about to land when a muffled groan began to sound from the metal gutters that surrounded the roof's perimeter. Tall flames shone bright in the darkness, rising up into the sky like incandescent claws, filling the air with a terrible smell of petrol. The commander of the squadron of men in black changed his flight pattern with a tug on the reins, pointing the tip of his hang glider straight down. He used the microphone he wore on his mouth to alert his companions, but it was a useless warning. The rest of the agents had already escaped the flames. The Green Phoenix terrorists had surrounded the roof with well-hidden flamethrowers, and landing there was literally impossible. Some gliders lost the protection of the wind and ended up in the water, where they sank with a low noise. Others found themselves pushed onto solid ground. After landing, the agents turned to observe the factory, which was so close and yet at the same time so very far. At 21 seconds past midnight, from the murky waters of the river emerged a large number of heads. Their faces were covered by scuba masks, leaving behind them long, thin trails of wake. The frogmen arrived at the riverbank on all sides, surrounding the small island. They moved towards their destination, leaving behind the aquatic propellers that had brought them there, now that they no longer needed to swim. After that, an official began to distribute weapons and underwater harpoons between his soldiers. A small group formed a scouting party that approached the walls of the factory to determine whether it was possible to climb up it using the climbing equipment they had brought. The circle of fire that burst from the roof lit up the night, emitting a terrible high-pitched hiss. The frogmen turned their heads, surprised, and didn't notice that their military boots were pressing against the fine metal cable stretched several centimeters above the ground. They heard the alarm sirens begin to sound from within the factory. A truck arrived in front of the iron bridge that crossed the river, linking the factory on the small island to the mainland. It was a regular military transport vehicle, although it was painted black and its sides were reinforced with metal bars, each one the width of the average adult's hand. On the front bumper was mounted a shovel that resembled a snowplow, and its metal boarding shone in the darkness as if illuminated from the inside. At 42 seconds past midnight, the truck driver extinguished the motor after parking the vehicle right at the mouth of the bridge so as to block any attempt at escaping through it. Someone opened the canvas that covered the trailer, revealing a small army of soldiers ready and waiting. They were all dressed in black, and their faces were covered in balaclavas and large night vision goggles. They began to move silently, unloading several crates from the truck and preparing to cross the bridge. They then saw the roof of the factory transform into a circle of light, and they heard the high-pitched squeal of alarms. Some dogs they hadn't spotted began to bark and growl furiously. The explosion immediately after took them by surprise. The bridge exploded into the air in a confused cloud of molten metal and dense, unbreathable smoke. The soldiers who were closer to the explosion were propelled back by the shockwave and thrown against the truck. The only things that had saved them were the sophisticated, reinforced, bulletproof jackets beneath their uniforms. The men positioned further back were dazed, watching as the metal bridge bent in on itself, sinking into the water with a hiss as the liquid tapped against the white-hot iron, and it seemed to them that they could never reach the factory. They quickly seized their radios and contacted the others to warn them of the danger. At the center of the first city stood an imposing edifice. It was a massive block of sky-blue stone. It was composed of a hexagonal, windowless structure, its roof decorated with gargoyles that resembled dragons about to take flight. A translucent path lifted into the air near the building, circling around 2 times to then disappear into the city. A translucent path lifted into the air near the building, circling around 2 times to then disappear into the sky, stretching towards the horizon. The path seemed to be made of completely smooth golden crystal. There was not a single window on the walls of the castle, and at a single access point, a drawbridge held up by a pair of large chains, one on each side. Despite its vivid colors, this place had a worrying, malevolent air about it. It was the weapon Hopper had constructed when he was working for Project Carthage what started it all. After escaping from the macabre project, the professor created the first city in Lyoko so that they would serve as immense barriers stopping this weapon from attacking humanity, and the castle was now active once again. The children stood silent before the drawbridge. None of them were brave enough to enter, not even Aelita, who, shame etched on her face, had left Xana to cross the bridge alone to then disappear into the dark entrance of the structure. Ulrich jumped from one foot to the other. For once he felt intimidated in his samurai clothing, and he would have loved to embrace Yumi so as to protect her from this place. Except that she was more than capable of defending herself. She would have teased him if he had tried. "What do you think Xana is doing in there?" he asked.
"Well, just what he said, no more, no less. He's creating monsters that we can use to teach the Green Phoenix a lesson," Eva immediately exclaimed. "And he's going to transform us into an army of Lyoko warriors."
"Well, I don't feel calm at all," Yumi retorted. "In the past, the castle infected Xana with a virus that turned him into a merciless, soulless being. What do we do if that happens again?" That won't happen, responded Aelita, shaking her head. Xana is different now. I trust him. But even so, there's still the fact that we're trying to use a very powerful weapon. A weapon never stops being an instrument used to kill, and I don't know if we can use it to do good. I mean... Ulrich sighed. He had thought about these things, but, as always, Yumi managed to put them into words much better. They needed to destroy the castle, because it could be turned against them, or fall into the wrong hands. What could they do if an army of monsters invaded Paris? The Green Phoenix terrorists could well become the least of their worries. Aelita also paused to think for a moment. I believe that we're forgetting something important, she then said. The castle isn't just a weapon. My father was the one who built it, remember? And he wouldn't want us to use it for the wrong reasons. I'm sure that Xana will use the castle's powers to help us. All I hope is that he invents something better than those robot soldiers, said Odd, who had remained silent until now. And then he moves a little faster, because I'm pretty sure it's already midnight. That's when the ground began to tremble. At first, Ulrich felt it as a trembling in the path, a light vibration that he felt through his wooden samurai sandals. What's happening? Eva yelped. Everything's collapsing, cried Odd. Ulrich saw the golden bridge move on its own, as if shaken by an invisible storm. Along the entire length of the surface began to appear large serpentine crevices. The trembling in the ground grew to a staggering shake, and the windows in the building nearest to them exploded, shattering into tiny shards. The children screamed and threw themselves to the floor. They heard a different noise to the earthquake, coming from the castle. It was a mix of beating wings and scared yeps. Then they saw the creatures come out over the drawbridge. At the front came a manta ray of a vivid orange color with small wings and a very long tail, followed by a mare as white as snow with a long ruby-colored horn. Behind them came a panther with a dark coat and enormous saber teeth, and a silver fox that had to be at least as large as the panther. Finally came Xana. His face showed a worried expression, and he held in his hand a fuchsia electric guitar that he threw to Eva. These will be your transportation, and your weapons, he explained to them. But before getting on, take these. They will serve to keep your Lyoko look even in the real world, rendering you invulnerable. The young man dug into one of his pockets and took out circular brooches that seemed to be made of hard plastic. On their surfaces was engraved the Eye of Xana. All around them, the first city seemed on the point of collapse. Ulrich saw a very tall skyscraper wave in the air before crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust, and yet his attention remained centered on the strange animals Xana had created for them. In particular, he couldn't take his eyes off the manta ray. Its wings were edged with red, and the creature flew with elegance and speed. Ulrich thought that it was doubtlessly the fastest of all the beings. To his great surprise, the manta ray did a pirouette in the air and descended on him, inviting him to climb onto its rump. Ulrich looked around. Eva Skinner was shredding the electric guitar and took off into the air at high speed like a witch on a broomstick. Alita was already on the unicorn, and Odd on his panther. Yumi caressed the fur of the gigantic silver fox. The boy took Xana's brooch and attached it to the back of his kimono, where it remained stuck there as if by magic. He then climbed onto the manta ray. Can you tell us where the earthquake is coming from? Someone is shutting down the supercomputer, Xana responded. You'll need to hurry to one of the towers, or you'll be stuck here forever. Aelita's unicorn was already galloping across the bridge that led to Lyoko. The young elf girl wore Xana's brooch over her heart, and she held herself with the grace and ease of a trained rider. They're shutting down the computer? What's going to happen now? Xana didn't respond. Jeremy was paralyzed, frozen like a deer in headlights. Grigor was near him, with the box in his hands and his finger already forcefully pressed down on the only button. Few paces away, Memory shivered under a lab coat. The boy couldn't take his eyes off the large cylinder. The upper part of the machine was becoming black, and its golden symbols gradually became opaque, eventually dimming completely. Jeremy thought that the supercomputer was a very complex machine, and so it would take some time to shut down completely. But how long? A few minutes, maybe 4 or 5. Either way, it wasn't long. Think, Jeremy, think! Aelita and the others were in Lyoko. At the end of the shutdown process, his friends would remain inert there, imprisoned in an infinite dream, as had happened to the girl years ago, until Jeremy had woken her up again. Aside from the problem with the terrorists, the children were safe inside Lyoko. But for Xana, the situation was much more complex. The artificial intelligence had changed too much during the last few days, and Jeremy didn't know if he had had enough time to make a backup copy of his data core. And without that backup copy... The boy looked at Grigory Notopoulos through his large, round glasses. He grit his teeth, lowered his head, and charged at the man. Grigory immediately passed the gun to the hand holding the box and seized Jeremy with the other. What are you trying to do, brat? Jeremy didn't respond. He began to kick and punch blindly, but Grigory increased the force he was using to hold the boy and managed to hold him steady. He then bit the terrorist's hand until his jaw hurt, and his adversary threw him against the wall. As his body impacted, the boy momentarily felt enveloped in a whirlwind of pain. He then realized that Memory had grabbed one of the computers from the floor. The woman raised a laptop above her head and threw it at Grigory, who elbowed it away. This time, Hannibal's agent raised his gun. Don't make me do it, he yelled. Grigory turned his back to Jeremy, so he couldn't see him. The boy threw himself at the man again, but this time he was trying more to get his attention than injure him. He doubled over just before impact and used his shoulders to knock the back of Grigory's knees. The man fell backward, and Jeremy rolled across the floor so as not to be squashed beneath him. "Memory!" he cried. "Restart the supercomputer!" The woman didn't hear him, but instead ran towards Grigory, who was lying on the ground, and kicked the hand that held his gun. Jeremy ran as fast as he could to the supercomputer, found the on-off lever, and lowered it. A spark of electricity burst out. The children almost reached the end of the bridge, and before them lay the precipice that led to Lyoko. Behind them, the first city was reduced to rubble. Its buildings fell one after the other. Even the smooth surface of the bridge began to be cracked by a large number of small crevices. Alita held onto the mane of her digital unicorn. Xana flew along beside her, transported by an invisible force. "You didn't answer me before," she said. "What will happen when the supercomputer is shut down?" "I don't know," admitted the young man. "You'll be trapped inside Lyoko, and there's no backup copy of my new identity. Honestly, I don't even know if it would be possible to make one. I'm much more like a human now, remember? But I don't have a physical body memorized in the factory scanners. I may vanish as if I have never existed. I don't want you to vanish," said Alita. "So, let's hope your friend Jeremy turns the supercomputer back on in time." Yumi caught up to them. Her silver wolf ran the large bounds, and its sharp teeth were drawn in a menacing snarl in the fury of the race against the clock. "Sorry to interrupt," said the girl, "but we're coming up on the precipice, and I don't think this fox knows how to fly." "Nor my panther or your unicorn," Odd immediately added. "Don't worry," murmured Xana. "Just jump. Your creatures will take care of the rest." Alita heard the sound of crystal breaking. The bridge peeled away behind them. Its scintillating fragments rained into the dimensionless void, vanishing into thin air. The girl turned to look ahead again and bent down, pressing her head against her unicorn's. "Be brave, beautiful," she whispered in its ear. "I know you can do it." She felt a little silly, because this animal was really a digital creature created by Xana, and possibly couldn't understand her, but she couldn't help it. She needed to hear it herself to keep her spirits up. She gripped her mane tighter between her fingers and planted her knees against the flanks of the strange horse. The unicorn jumped. But instead of falling straight down, the creature pressed its hooves against the wall of the cliff and continued to run vertically, scraping up small pieces of stone due to the incredible friction. Auric launched in front of Alita on his manta ray, and Eva flew along shrilling her electric guitar. Behind the girl, Yumi and Odd ran at breakneck speed towards the heart of Lyoko. "Yahoo!" cried the catboy. "Now this is incredible!" Alita smiled. She began to feel calmer. It seemed that the walls of the well were holding up for now. Unlike the bridge, it wasn't giving any hint of breaking. She turned to Xana. Any news?" she asked him. "It seems as though the shutdown process has been interrupted, but it will be some time before things go back to normal again. Don't declare victory yet, and let's hurry to the nearest tower."